The salty air carried the scent of the ocean. Seagulls cried overhead. Elena breathed deeply as she walked along the sandy path. The little town of Seabrook had always felt like home. She had spent countless summers here with her grandmother, Grace. Grace had owned a charming bookstore overlooking the sea. Its shelves were filled with stories that had transported Elena to faraway lands. Elena missed her grandmother dearly. Grace had passed away a few months ago. She had left the bookstore to Elena in her will. Elena knew she wanted to keep the store alive. It was more than just a business. It was a legacy of love and words. Elena started spending her days organizing shelves and reminiscing. She found solace in the familiar scent of old books and the gentle sea breeze. One rainy afternoon, Elena stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath a shelf. Inside lay a small, dusty box. Her heart pounded with curiosity. She carefully lifted the lid. Among faded photographs and yellowed postcards, a letter caught her eye. It was addressed to a Margaret in elegant cursive handwriting. The letter was dated June 12th, 1945. It was signed simply, "Yours eternally, Samuel." Elena felt a shiver run down her spine. She couldn't resist the allure of the past. As she began reading, she knew she had discovered something extraordinary. Samuel's words painted a vivid picture of love and longing. He wrote from a military camp. He described his anticipation to return home to his beloved Margaret. Elena was drawn into their story. Each sentence was filled with Samuel's adoration for Margaret. He wrote of their dreams, their promises, and their unwavering love. Elena carefully examined the faded ink and the elegant handwriting. She imagined Samuel sitting by a flickering candlelight. He poured his heart out on paper. The letter revealed a love story that had been hidden for decades. Elena was captivated. This wasn't just a letter, it was a time capsule of emotions. The letter ended abruptly. There was no mention of why Samuel hadn't returned home. Elena felt a pang of sadness. She yearned to know what had happened to Samuel and Margaret. Driven by a thirst for answers, she decided to embark on a quest to uncover the truth behind the letter. Elena started her search in her grandmother's attic. She looked through old photo albums and dusty trunks. She hoped to find a clue. Days turned into weeks, and still, Elena found herself no closer to unraveling the mystery. Just when her hope began to dwindle, she came across an old, leather-bound diary tucked away on a dusty shelf. The diary belonged to her grandmother. As Elena carefully turned the brittle pages, she discovered an entry about Samuel and Margaret. Grace had been a young woman during the war. She had been friends with Margaret. In her diary, Grace wrote about Margaret's infectious laughter and her unwavering devotion to Samuel. Elena learned that Samuel and Margaret had met at a dance hall. It was just before Samuel was shipped out. Their love had blossomed quickly. They were inseparable in the few precious months they had together. Grace's words painted a poignant picture of their love story. It was a love story cut short by the tragedy of war. Eleanor's heart ached as she read about Margaret's devastation when Samuel's letters stopped coming. Days turned into weeks, then months. Margaret clung to the hope of his return. Elena could only imagine the pain Margaret must have endured. A name leaped out at Elena from the pages of her grandmother's diary: Rose Thompson. Rose had been Margaret's closest confidant. She might still be alive. Elena felt a surge of hope. She was determined to find Rose and piece together the fragments of this forgotten love story. Elena discovered that Rose was living in a nearby nursing home. She visited Rose with a mix of trepidation and excitement. Rose's wrinkled face lit up when Elena mentioned Margaret and Samuel. Memories flickered in her aged eyes. She told Elena that Margaret had waited for Samuel for years. She refused to believe he was gone. Rose revealed that Samuel had been reported missing in action, but his remains were never found. Margaret held on to the hope that he was still out there. Elena listened intently, her heart heavy with empathy. She couldn't imagine carrying such a burden of uncertainty and longing. Rose then shared a secret that had been hidden for decades. Margaret had received a letter from a fellow soldier after the war. The letter confirmed that Samuel had survived the fighting but had been severely injured. He was sent to a hospital in Europe. However, all records of his whereabouts after that were lost. Years later, Margaret eventually moved on with her life. She married another man and found happiness, but she never forgot Samuel. She kept his letters and photographs as a testament to their love. Rose's words filled in the missing pieces of the puzzle, yet Elena couldn't help but wonder why Samuel never returned to Margaret. Elena returned to the bookstore, her mind racing with questions. She sat at her grandmother's old desk, the letter in her hands. She noticed something she hadn't before. There was a faint postmark on the back of the envelope. It was from a town in Maine. With renewed determination, Elena delved into online archives and historical records. She discovered that there was a veterans hospital in the same town. It had been operational during the time of Samuel's disappearance. Elena felt a surge of hope. Could Samuel have been a patient there? Elena contacted the hospital. She inquired about any surviving records from the 1940s. After weeks of waiting, she received a response. The hospital confirmed that a Samuel Wilson had been a patient there in 1946. He had suffered from amnesia and had been unable to recall his past. He had remained at the hospital for several months before being transferred to another facility. Elena was stunned. Samuel had been alive and so close to Margaret all those years ago, but why hadn't he reached out to her? She knew she had to find out what had happened to him. Eleanor's search for Samuel led her to a nursing home in Vermont. There, she found him. Samuel was now an old man. His memory was fading. But when Elena showed him the letter, a spark of recognition flickered in his eyes. He reached out and gently touched the faded ink. Samuel told Elena he had never forgotten Margaret. After regaining his memory, he had been too ashamed to contact her. He had felt like a broken man. He didn't want to disrupt her life. Elena listened with tears in her eyes. She realized that Samuel had carried the weight of his choices for all these years. Elena stayed with Samuel for several days. She shared stories about Margaret and the life she had lived. She showed him pictures of her grandmother's bookstore. She told him how much his letter had meant to her. In their brief time together, Elena felt a profound connection to Samuel. He was a living link to the past. He embodied a love story that had endured through time. Samuel passed away peacefully a few weeks later. Elena returned to Seabrook, her heart heavy but full. She placed Samuel's letter in a place of honor in the bookstore. She wanted to keep their memory alive. She knew that their story was a testament to the enduring power of love and the importance of cherishing every moment. Elena continued to run her grandmother's bookstore with a renewed sense of purpose. She saw each book as a portal to different worlds, just like Samuel's letter had transported her to the past. She felt a deep connection to the countless love stories, adventures, and mysteries that lined the shelves. One sunny afternoon, a young man walked into the bookstore. He was drawn to the display of vintage love stories. As he browsed the books, he struck up a conversation with Elena. He shared that he was a writer. He was looking for inspiration. Elena smiled. She knew just the story to tell him.